On Tuesday, July 12, 2016, DCFS held a public town hall meeting hosted by Director George H. Sheldon and Cook County Regional Administrator Jackie Collier. Nearly 380 people attended the event at Kennedy King College on the south side of Chicago. With Director Sheldon just in his second year, the town hall meeting provided attendees with the opportunity to hear about the DCFS transformation and how to provide feedback on the newly released draft of the Illinois Child Welfare Strategic Plan.
Good afternoon, I'm Jackie Collier, and I'm the Regional Administrator for Cook County.
There was standing room only, and the crowd was very interested.
Director George Sheldon has been leading DCFS for over a year now, and he is the first confirmed director in Illinois in several years. He brings experience from other states as well as the national level and is an expert in systems reform. I have a lot more that I could read and a whole lot more that I could say, but without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Director George Sheldon.
Thank you, Jackie. It's good to be here. Actually, it was interesting, but this is our fourth town hall meeting. We had one last week in Mount Vernon and East St. Louis, and one the week before in Aurora. This is the fourth of 5. And the interesting thing is how this really changes almost location to location. I mean, Aurora, the leading words, significantly leading words, were prevention and services. And I think all of us are struggling, obviously, with the funding and the budget issues moving forward. But it's a good reflection of that. And Jackie, I appreciate you being here. I came up from Florida, by the way. I got here the day you had 18 inches of snow. Thought about whether it was actually wise to be here. And asked Jackie, who had been our regional administrator in Miami-Dade, I appreciate her coming. I also want to recognize a good friend, Director Dixon, who's heading up the detention unit here in Cook. He is from Opa-locka and also from Florida. I tried to get most of Florida to come up, but they were the only 2 people who were willing to withstand the weather here. But it is good to be here, and the more I've gotten around, the more impressed I am with this community, and particularly with our frontline workers. Because this is, quite frankly, the most experienced frontline staff I've ever had. Frankly, I think it's the most experienced staff in the country. When we look at the wealth of experience here, it way surpasses other states. I also think we fundamentally have to begin to trust the front line because of the knowledge. They know communities better than we do. I also want to recognize a couple other people. Senator Batty Hunter, who has been a real ally in the department. She's kind of been a girl in the fight. John Ford is with us. Representative Harper, who actually represents the very spot that I'm standing. And Alderman Willie Cochran is here as well. Alderman. And the reason I recognize them is not just to suck up to them, but it really is. These jobs you can't do by yourself. And there's got to be a partnership with those people at the local level and with our state legislators. And I think that partnership is very important moving forward. What we've attempted to do is really do a strategic plan of where Illinois is right now in the whole area of providing services to children and families. and where Illinois ought to be going in the future. Learning from all of you and learning from our partners and learning from kids as well. I'm so pleased that Jackie included Carlos in this program, because we really designed the whole child welfare system in this country. We never talked to kids. And who knows more about the child welfare system than those young people who are actually experiencing it. So I think that needs to be a fundamental beginning of any kind of reform that we have here. So we pulled our leadership team together and those in our private providers to really put together some ideas about a strategic plan moving forward. And we then rolled that out to several of our partners in the community. These town hall meetings are an effort to now roll it out to the community at large and to get input, because this strategic plan is just that, a draft. It is not a final document. And that's the reason we're having these town hall meetings, to get feedback from you. That's the reason it's on the website, so I encourage you to go to the website, look in detail, because it's a lot more detailed than I'm going to be able to go into today. So please seriously evaluate what the plan says and what you think it ought to say. I also want to recognize John Mackey, who's in the audience, who has been a leading proponent of what we're doing. John who's director of a lot of the child welfare funding programs, the juvenile justice funding programs that we're doing. So as we take a look at this strategic plan, it's really important to have your input, because you are really the stakeholders. And it's important for us to do this well, not just from the standpoint of our policies and our approaches, but to do it well in terms of every single decision we make for every single child. What I've tried to tell our frontline staff is, first of all, figure out what the right thing to do is for a child, and then figure out how the rules apply. And I'm also saying, don't violate a rule, but if a rule has a stupid result, and some of them do, bump it up to somebody who can actually make a decision and consider some waivers. So our work is really where an error or a wrong decision can have tremendous impacts on the life of a child or on the life of a family. An error in either direction makes a big difference. In a family that's unnecessarily split up or even falsely accused of something bad, the abuse of a child, or a child left in a situation that's more dangerous than we realize. You know, we talk a lot about sports, and we know that football is a game of inches. What we're dealing with is about millimeters. And every one of those millimeters is the life of a child. So what we want to do is think about, where do we want Illinois to be 2, 3, 5 years from now? And I know with the financial crisis that we've just gone under, with a lack of a budget for the last year plus, that you say, how can we talk about long-term strategic plan? But we have to. There will be a point when this budget crisis is over, when we've got a budget that's more than a stopgap budget. And there are a lot of positive things happening at the federal level that are going to impact what we're doing here in states. So I'm asking you to really think about not how the system currently exists, but how you wanted to see it 3, 5 years from now. Many of you may have already heard about the Health and Human Services transformation that's going on in Illinois. There are 13 state agency directors who've gotten together over the period of the last 6 to 8 months to really put together a new way of thinking in Illinois in terms of leveraging our resources between agencies. I'm not telling any of you on the front line anything new, but the more we can deal with mental health and substance abuse, the less we have to do to bring children and families up to some level of par. So what happens at the Department of Human Services directly impacts us. What happens at HFS and Medicaid to allow us to expand our resources. And I also want us, and this is the first time I've seen, and these are the 13 agencies that have been involved, from education to corrections to HFS to public health to the governor's office, yes, and to DCFS. And I think a lot of people would say, well, what is corrections doing at the table? They're not a health and human service agency. But the fact of the matter is they are and must be. Because ultimately every one of those individuals who've been incarcerated are going to return to the community, virtually without exception. And when I talk to Director Baldwin, Department of Corrections, and he tells me that in excess of 60% of his inmates have had some impact with the child welfare system, we've got to fundamentally think about doing things differently, about outcomes for kids. So that's why corrections is big. For instance, we're doing a pilot in Logan, women's prison in central Illinois. 60% of the women in Logan's prison have children. 15% of the women there have children in foster care. So how can we maintain that connection between that child and that child's mom? Now you can do that with older kids with video conferencing. But what we're doing at Logan is really piloting a program to, because infants and toddlers, human interaction, human warmth is so critical to the long-term development of that child. And from Director Baldwin's standpoint, it really incentivizes mom to believe that she can one day get out of that environment. So it keeps her on track. And I think that's important to recognize. In addition to that, one of the main elements of this HHS transformation is maximizing federal money. We can't just do this in Illinois. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know over the period of the last year without accessing federal money. One of the things we were able to do, because we began doing our paperwork, is bring down $21.5 million in Title IV money, solely because we were doing the paperwork necessary when a child turned 18. Because prior to that, their eligibility is based on the family income of the family they come out of. At 18, all of a sudden they're a family of one. They're automatically eligible. But we've got to do the paperwork to make sure that happens with the court. $21.5 million solely by dotting some I's and crossing some T's. So what we're doing in conjunction with particularly HFS and Human Services is applying to the federal government, hopefully by the end of August of this year, for an 1115 waiver. Now for those of you who aren't sophisticated in Medicaid waivers, the state of California applied for 1115 waiver and brought $3.5 million of additional Medicaid dollars into the state of California. And we can't do that. But we can bring over $1 billion here in additional Medicaid funding through a waiver over the period of the next 6 years. That can help us do what we want, what we need to do. And what CMS in Washington is saying, the last 1115 waiver that was submitted by Illinois and rejected by the federal government, really the reaction we had is it was a Christmas tree. Everybody got everything on it. And CMS said we're not going to do it that way. They said if you want a waiver approved, particularly if you want it approved before this administration leaves office, and you don't have to wait another year for a new administration to get up to date, is make sure it's narrow and focused. So all of the agencies got together and said, what is the one thing that affects all of us? And it's behavioral health. The correction system is the largest mental institutions in this state, and frankly, it's the largest mental institution in the country. Mental health and substance abuse drives domestic violence, drives adult abuse, drives child abuse and child neglect. So what can we do to really accentuate what we're doing in Illinois? around behavioral health. And the 1115 waiver is a way to help us maximize federal dollars. I think it's an important step forward. It will give us additional flexibility, additional funding. But the larger goal is really to make Illinois a national leader in early detection and the treatment of mental illness. We want to also put a new focus, and this is what the strategic plan is talking about, on prevention and public health. In addition to that, Congress, which any of you who haven't read the papers of late, generally doesn't act very quickly. But about 3 weeks ago, on a Friday, legislation was introduced in both House and Senate at the federal level, and it was bipartisan. Actually, Democrats and Republicans can come together on some issues, and this is an area where they did. Wednesday of the next week, it passed the House Ways and Means Committee. Tuesday of the next week, it passed the United States House of Representatives. And it will be taken up in the next 2 weeks in the United States Senate. And what it will do is significant in terms of the transformation that we've embraced. And that is children belong in homes and in the community, not in deep-end residential facilities. So what the federal government is saying is that the only $4 that can be used from the federal level in residential facilities is for, quote, a qualified, federally qualified therapeutic facility with nursing care and true therapeutic care. And those federal dollars will only continue for 12 consecutive months or 18 non-consecutive months. That is a significant change. And I also will say we've got to work with our community providers because we ask them to build these things. We will always have some need, even under the federal plan, for some level of residential, but not at the extent we have right now. So how can we help those providers transition to a different kind of environment? But the second part of the federal legislation, for the first time, the federal government is now saying that you can use federal $4 to provide services in the home and not bring the child into care. The most dramatic expansion of impact family services. To pay for mental health services if Medicaid doesn't pick it up, to pay for substance abuse services, to pay for home visiting, which frankly is one of the most productive programs out there. When you think about it, 75% of children come into care not because of abuse, but because of neglect. To what extent have we made poverty a reason to bring children into care? And to what extent can we give support to families? And how many, a lot of kids are having kids today. Kids who may not have had the best upbringing themselves. I went out on a home visit with a social worker, and this mother had a 5-year-old. She was a single young mom, and she said, she'd been in the program for about a year and a half, and she said, you know, that's the way I discipline my child because it's the way I've been disciplined. So to what extent can we give some parenting skills? To what extent can we give some nutrition? And it's a huge influx of federal dollars. So over the period of the next 3 years, by October of 2019, these new federal goals will be in place. So we've got a big lift in that next 3-year period to make things happen. We've got to focus in it, not just in prevention. We've got to focus on paying for value and outcomes rather than volume and services. We've moved so far about 350 kids out of deep end residential to home and relatively community setting. That's a great thing. But that is not our goal. Our goal is to assure that those children have improved outcomes. So purely moving them to the community is not enough if we don't have the wraparound services to support those kids. So we've contracted with Chapin Hall to actually track those young kids over the period of the next 2 years. Just to, in effect, say, are we getting the better outcomes for these youth? The third thing we've got to do is really focus on evidence-based and data-driven decisions. You know, there was a time in child welfare, frankly, there was a time in juvenile justice across the board when we had more questions than we had data. Now we've got so much friggin' data, we don't know how to really analyze it. And I see some of our frontline workers smiling at it. It's true. So we've got to really integrate our data systems and be able to measure progress that we're making. And it's not about 163 CFSR standards. When you're, and I'm not against the CFSR, but when you've got 163 measures, what are we really measuring? You've got to narrow that down to about 8 or 9 that really are the ones that drive the system moving forward. And as an example, we're going to be rolling out in September what we call a 360 view of the child. The child becomes known to a detective investigator, you enter the name of the child and the parents into the system. It will automatically go out and check other databases, state databases, for known relatives and fictive kin, and allow the worker to have access to TANF information, SNAP information, Medicaid information on each of those individuals. Caseworkers and protective investigators ought to be doing casework, not paperwork. And the extent to which we can use technology to change the dynamics, it can make a huge difference. After we roll out that pilot, we'll be expanding it to include sexual offender data, child support data, and there's that whole integration of our data is so critical moving forward. When I was in Florida, we had a child who went missing for 9 months and wasn't reported missing for 4 months, even though the child was supposed to be seen every 30 days. And we ultimately found that child in Portage, Wisconsin, because a young analyst at the Department of Law Enforcement found that the paramour of the Courtney's mother, who had abducted the child after she got out of prison, had applied for a credit card with a Portage, Wisconsin address. Within 20 minutes, Portage police were at the house. They found the child, Courtney, 2 years old, safe. But her stepbrother was hiding in the closet. He'd been scalded and tortured. His mother was buried in the backyard. So I said, what if we had reported that child missing on the day, the 30th day when the child was supposed to have been visiting? So I asked our folks, quite simply, and I didn't expect what I heard back, how many children haven't been seen in 30 days? They came back and said 6,000. I said, you've got to be kidding me. They said, well, it's really not 6,000. Because what caseworkers do is they enter the notes in longhand, and then they'll go back and enter the database. So the problem with that, let's say we only have 50 kids who haven't been seen. How can I identify those 50 kids? So we had some smart technology people, and they basically designed, and we've now piloted in Mount Vernon, I think piloted here in Cook. So every worker was given an iPad or an iPhone or a Droid. So you took a picture of the child every visit. So you had an updated picture instead of one that's 5 years old, because you can't actually identify the child. GPS date and timestamp, so you know the visit happened. That protects both the child and the worker. Case notes entered into the device, automatically uploaded to the database. As opposed to entering notes in longhand and then ultimately re-entering it later, having somebody else re-enter it, which brings about potential for mistakes in the process. Technology is not the answer, but it can be a huge tool. Predictive analytics. What are the risk factors that we ought to be looking at when we make a determination to bring a child into care? So let's do some predictive analytics to identify those risk factors. But I want to caution people that predictive analytics should be seen as a tool, not a decision maker. So I don't want to see, if we roll out predictive analytics, if you score 80%, you bring the child into care. If you score 79%, you don't. Because ultimately it's about the judgment, the experience, the expertise, and the training of the worker. And my view is that is the very thing that we've got to trust in the system. Because virtually everybody I've met in this agency and our provider agencies and the advocates is sincere about wanting to do the right thing for a child, which means we have to trust them moving forward. So our strategy in this agency is to really develop a system with shared values and shared strategies. We want to prevent problems before they start. We want to detect problems early when they can be addressed more effectively. Because we have failed if a child ages out of care and they don't have an education, or they don't have a job skill. And they go right to John Baldwin's agency. So there was a time back in, 50 years ago, when all the federal direction, remember back in the 50s, well, you all know. Better you remember direction. 50 years ago, we did orphanages because we thought that was the right, it was the right thing to do 50 years ago. 50 years ago, the exclusive focus in child welfare was child safety. But to be honest with you, we know how to keep kids safe. That's frankly the easy part. All you have to do is bring them into care, lock them in a room, give them 3 hot meals a day, a place to sleep, they're safe. But they're going to age out without social skills, without an education, without the ability to develop any kind of meaningful self-sufficiency. So it's not just about child safety, it's got to be about child well-being. Is this child developing the kind of social skills necessary? And we've got also, as a system, quit putting kids in care in cocoons. Because what are we more concerned about protecting the system or protecting the child? Every decision we make as an agency has some element of risk. But let's be sure we're not so risk adverse that we so insulate a child. We don't allow foster kids to do normal things that normal kids do. We had a woman in our agency in Florida who, as the dangerous activities are, I didn't even know we had one. But she would approve anything a child could participate in. Like, well, Johnny can participate in Boy Scouts, but he can't participate in archery. Now, you may not want your foster child skydiving. You probably don't want your own child skydiving. So why don't we empower foster parents and train them to make prudent parent decisions? Sally wants to do a sleepover down the street with her best friend. Do we really need a home study and a background check? First of all, she doesn't want to admit to her best friend that she's in foster care. So she avoids doing that. I talked to about 50 young foster kids one time, and I said, if you were in my position and you could do anything you wanted to do to change the system, what would it be? And they came out with a lot of different suggestions. And then this one 11-year-old little boy, I think, put it most succinctly. He said, just stop calling us foster kids. We're just kids. We use all these non-normal words. Think about it. Our biological kids may move from home to home to home as we move from house to house to house to house. Our kids move from placement to placement to placement. We call our kids kids. We call foster kids wards. And who came up with the word paramour? How many of you dated a paramour? I mean, seriously. So we really have to think that we know more now about child welfare than we knew a decade ago. And I talked to so many people on the front line and saying, why are we always changing our practice model? The fact is, our knowledge is changing. We now, 10 years ago, you didn't hear anybody talk about the impacts of trauma on kids or the impact of adverse childhood experiences. And yet now we know it's real. Now we know that 80% of brain development happens in the first 5 years of life. We didn't know that a decade ago, and we will know more a decade from now than we know today. So that's why we've got to constantly be looking at best practice and the best things that are happening now. Early intervention, we know, has an impact on the lives of children and on the problems of families. I think it's also fundamental to understand that a home is not just a place. A home is a feeling. And when we put children with strangers, no matter how good or caring those strangers may be, it takes a long time for those strangers to become a family. So I think we need to remember that a biological family may not be a storybook life for a lot of children. But also we need to remember that foster care is no Disneyland either. Where do kids run? Home. May have been the only thing they knew. It was the only thing they knew. Think about it. I've talked to so many mothers who have substance abuse problems. It doesn't mean they don't love their child. So how can we help mom deal with that issue? Now, I think most of you would agree with me that all knowledge doesn't reside in the Thompson Center or in Springfield. The problems aren't in Springfield. The problems are in Aurora and Cook and East St. Louis. Well, there's some people who probably would say that all problems are in Springfield. But you know best what your community needs. And it's your community who will look to you for answers. And that's the reason that we're trying to take a larger vision of driving responsibility and authority and moving decision-making to the local level. So that each community provides the care for its children, their safety, their health, their education. So we thought it was important to express our collective values. We value trust, compassion, accountability, responsiveness, relationships, respect, empathy, safety. We hope to build a circle of trust with our youth, with our families, with our partners, and with our stakeholders. And I know for those of you who have been involved in this work for a long time, to ask you for trust is a big leap of faith. Because I'm sure that a lot of folks are saying, well, we've heard this before. Will anything really change? I'm asking you to give us the benefit of the doubt. To trust one more time that we can make a difference for children. So to fulfill this mission, we've identified 6 overriding goals. And we urge you to go into strategic planning and look at the strategic planning document and look at those goals. Education and self-sufficiency, which is the foundation of everything else in a child's life. Moving from institutional care to community care. Paying for quality and outcomes, prevention, population health, data integration and predictive analytics. And finally, to repair and build and maintain relationships and ongoing communications. We need to do a lot within each of those goals. And I don't have time to go through all of them because some of them have as many as 20 or 30 under each goal. There's a list of objectives and a list of strategies. And I really encourage you to go on the document and identify what have we left out. and what have we focused on. So we need to provide better educational and job opportunities. These are just a couple of things that we've identified in the strategic plan, but I encourage you to go on and look at the others. We need to reduce the reliance on institutional care. When we cannot safely unify families, we have to develop more community alternatives for them where they can be in permanent homes and feel nurtured and feel loved. We need to build a strong model of care and encourage improved quality. There's a difference between the lowest cost and the best value, and we need to recognize that. And we want to financially redesign our system so we recognize providers that are actually doing better outcomes for children. So, over the process of the development of the strategic plan, we will be getting your feedback, and by early September, we will roll out a final strategic plan. After we've had your input, after you've had an opportunity to comment, after we've worked with our community partners, and after we've worked with those in juvenile justice and corrections and other agencies. And then in October, I think it's October 18th and 19th, we will be doing, in conjunction with the court systems, a statewide summit of judges, law enforcement, protective investigators, birth parents, foster parents, children, youth, assistant state attorneys, to really roll out that strategic plan and roll out those initiatives one by one. And let me also say it is important to have the judges at the table, because they control a significant part of this. And part of this, I talked about trust. Part of this is this department regaining the trust of the judicial system, so that when we go into a court, they really can begin to trust that we tried every possible thing, that we looked at every possible option. So Casey Family Programs, which has been helping us with the strategic planning process, which is a fairly large foundation today, it's part of the wealth of the UPS system, have given a sizable grant to the National Association of State Courts. The National Association has selected 4 states, Florida, Alabama, Oregon, and Illinois, for the purposes of reimagining the court system. So we've been working with Mike Tardy at the Illinois Office of the Courts to really talk about how can we really do the collaboration, how can we regain the trust. So it's important for us to develop that relationship. We need to keep developing programs around prevention. For instance, here in Cook County, we've established a partnership with Sheriff Dart in Cook, where he's identified 5 deputy sheriffs. We've identified 3 detective investigators who are co-located for the purpose of exclusively finding, identifying, recovering youth who are missing or run away. At any given time, there are 200 youth missing in Illinois. 100 usually here in Cook County. And we know that the statistics show that within 72 hours, a child who's out on the streets by themselves is approached by a vehicle. And all of a sudden, can get trapped in a whole human trafficking ring. So these young people are highly vulnerable. And it's that kind of partnership that we've got to develop with people like Sheriff Dart and others who are willing to trust us one more time. We need to make use of our growing collection of data so we can make better decisions. And it's also important that we make progress of really making foster parenting a welcoming experience. instead of just saying, well, here's your pride training, here's a child, we'll see you in 30 days. We've got to be there for the foster parent. You know, and let me make one other comment as an aside, which wasn't in my notes, but this ad that runs nationally, it says, you don't have to be perfect to be a foster parent. I don't really like that ad. If you don't have to be perfect to be a foster parent, why do we expect birth parents to be perfect? Because we know parents struggle. And we need to work with them through that struggle. We need to work with the foster parents. And foster parents need to begin to be the ally of the biological parent as opposed to the advocate. So today is one step, I hope, in that direction. Before we open it up for your input, your questions, and your comments, I want to mention one other plan. We've worked with the federal court, with our experts, on what we're calling immersion sites. And in those immersion sites, I will be waiving a lot of our rules that are cumbersome and get in the way. So we've identified four sites, and forgive me, we didn't start with the Cook, but we're going to get there. Lake County, Rock Island, the St. Clair County area, and Mount Vernon. That's 11% of Illinois. We will be taking to the Civil Service Commission and this week the authority to, in effect, hire emergent site directors. And for a period of time, this will bypass our current regional structure. As we begin to give to those emergent sites the kind of authority to make decisions, both in terms of placement, integrated assessment, clinical assessment, to really integrate that within the emergent site. So these emergent sites are not about baptism or about swimming. They're really about how can we immerse. And one of the things that was identified in the word map that you all did was culture. And that's something we've got to address because we have become too bureaucratized. And we have managed too much by discipline rather than by leadership. So I'm asking you just to believe for a minute that we can, if we can accomplish half of what I'm talking about, we can make a major change for children. So this involves everybody in the community, law enforcement, the courts, the juvenile justice system. And the immersion sites are an opportunity to do that. So those 4 sites will be up and running by September. 9 months later, we will roll out a second cohort, and we will learn from the first cohort. One thing that somebody said to me is don't do system reform statewide, although we're doing some of that. Don't do system reform statewide. Do some areas, evaluate that, and learn from it as you begin to roll it out. So we need your ideas, we need your services, your input, your dedication. It's often said that if you want to see the past, touch a rock. If you want to see the present, touch a flower. If you want to see the future, touch the life of a child. There is no greater calling than to do what we're doing. Because, well, children may only be 25% of our population. Think about it. They're 100% of our future. You are doing the most important work of any state agency, and I'm not against building roads, but you're doing the most important work of any state agency. That's why what we do is so important, because together it really is about breaking the cycles of poverty. I talked to a young woman the other day, 19 years old, 3rd generation foster care. And her goal is to end the cycle right there. That's got to be our goal. Jackie?